everyone, and good whatever wonderful moment of this day you are enjoying on your time zones as you are watching us or listening to us, either now live or as Jessa already dropped it in the comments later on as you enjoy the recording. My name is Minol Ajak. I will be your co host for the next hour. Jessa, as always, is working her magic backstage. And it is such a joy to welcome you to the first conversation of our June series. Now, June will be dedicated throughout to discussing employee experience. And today we are kicking it off with going back to the basics. We will spend the next hour talking about sending up the foundations, and we will go as deep as we will have time for it into what employee experience is, and equally what employee experience is not. I do see comments coming in, and that is always great to see. First, because we know everything is up and running. And second, whenever you drop a comment with your location, it helps us travel around the world vicariously. So please keep those comments coming. And as Jessa will help me get the wonderful speakers on stage, I will encourage everybody in the audience to consider this conversation as much yours as it is our panelists. So, whatever it is that we will be touching on during our conversation, please drop your comments, your thoughts, your own experience, your own take on the topic. We always find so many amazing and inspiring nuances, whether across geographies, whether across cultures, whether across different workplaces. And this is such an awesome, generous way to help us learn from each other and keep this community growing in more ways than one. Now, what I will do, I will try to make the most out of our time together. And we will start off by me taking the e-mic around the screen clockwise as usual. And I will ask you to firstly shortly introduce yourselves, and also do share with us what is the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear employee experience. Krista, welcome. It's so good to have you today.
Yes, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is where you are. My name is Krista Vaught. I am on the employee learning side, so I design and facilitate a pretty wide variety of learning initiatives for employees within an organization in higher education. And I'm also a certified coach and also just a plug for Hacking HR's People Experience Certificate. I just wrapped that up, and that was a great experience. To respond to that first question, the first thing I think of with employee experiences is not just the large moments. We tend to think of that employee journey map and sort of the larger onboarding and promotions and performance reviews, but it's also every moment in between all of those as well.
Thank you so very much, Krista. Colin, always a joy having you on a panel. Welcome.
Good to see you. Good to be with all of you. And good morning, good afternoon, wherever it is you happen to be. My name is Colin Mincy. I am the co-founder of a consultancy that's actually focused on employee experience and how we center safety and build community at work so that people of all abilities and backgrounds can thrive. The word that comes to mind for me when I think about employee experience is journey. And I think Krista, uh, said it beautifully, and I agree. I think the way that people enter the organization, the things that people see, observe, and experience and hear about, right? What people hear about sometimes is just about as important as what they experience. The extent that those things inform people's journey, that's in my view, how I think about the employee experience.
Thank you so very much for being here. And Mary, it's been a hot minute since we shared the screen. It's so great to see you again.
Same. Very happy to be here, and happy Pride Month for everyone. My name is Mary Garcia, and I am the Director of Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging at Hagerty. And when I think about employee experience, for me, it really is an accumulation of encounters, observations, and day-to-day learning that takes place over the course of an employee's journey. I think, Colin, you just call it a journey as well. It's all of those things in between those touch points, and then all of those small points in between those aspects of what really drives their experience.
Thank you. Anuja, good to see you again. Welcome into this panel.
Hi, Manola. Nice to meet you again. And good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. Happy to be here. My name is Anuja, and I'm located in the DC area. I work for Metro, and I manage leadership development, change management, and executive coaching at Metro. Everybody, I believe, knows that. Employee experience to me is what people feel the day before they have to return to work. So on their day off, how do they feel about going into work the next day? Are you excited, happy, worried? Are you looking forward to meeting the people, doing your job? And then what do you go and tell your friends about where you work? So it's not really what's on the company websites, it's what people say to each other about their experience in their workplace. Thank you.
Thank you. And making this wonderful panel complete. Carol, good to see you today.
Good to see you too, Manola. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone out there. My name is Carol Cooley, and I'm a human resources executive based in Denver. I have a passion for employee experience. And, when I think of really what it is, it's a connected series of experiences that people have in their work environment. We've heard the word journey already today from both Colin and Mary, and I think it's really about that collection of experiences. And I think even more important today, one thing that I would add about employee experience is differentiated. I think oftentimes traditional folks would think about, okay, how do I make one experience to many? And these days, I think it's really much more about taking something that's more differentiated, more personal, and turning it into a multitude of experiences for individuals so that they can connect from wherever they might be.
Thank you so very much to all of you for taking the time and the energy to be here. I will just want to welcome people who joined over the past several minutes. So welcome, everybody. I was thinking back as I was getting ready for our conversation. I was thinking back to a panel we recorded, I think about 2 years ago for one of our Hacking HR Global conferences. And I remember there was a conversation there around employee experience. And one of the key highlights within that particular panel was challenging whether is it employee experience or should it be people experience, so that it drives a wider focus, a wider radar for the moments on the journeys we are building. And I just want to bring that reflection into our conversation and maybe take a couple of minutes. Employee experience, people experience. What are your thoughts on this topic? And we will consider this round as the unmuting competition rehearsal. So please jump in as inspiration strikes, and we will take it from there. Who's our pioneer today? Let's see. Anuja.
All right. I'm going to go with what Krista and Colin said about the journey, right? And the journey begins way before the person becomes an employee of the organization. So I think, Manola, on point, I think it's more people experience because it is how people engage with the job openings, the website, talking to people who already work in the organization. How is their onboarding experience after that if they join, if they get hired? And then it continues far beyond their job when they are offboarded, they exit the organization, become a part of the talent community. They call it alumni. And maybe some of them boomerang and come back to the organization if they really had a great experience or they refer other talent. So I completely agree. I think it should be people experience and not just employee experience because of the scope that it covers.
Thank you, Anuja. Mary, I see you unmuted, and then we go to Krista. So Mary and Krista.
I would have to agree with her as well. When I think of people experience, it really is that broader piece that encompasses not only the experience of employees, but also their stakeholders. And, that's more of like your customers, maybe your partners and communities, and employee experience is a part of that. Whereas, when you think about employee experience, it's more individualized to their onboarding, their engagement, their development, their work environment. Whereas with people experience, you're thinking about customer experience, partner experience, community experience, of course, the employee experience, but also the brand experience of the company. So I almost see it as like a macro, micro level when we talk about that in the workplace.
I was going to say something similar. I think they're the three main pieces: the candidate experience, the employee experience, and the customer experience. So if you think about those sort of in a flow, that a person who has a positive candidate experience can lead to a more engaged employee, who then their employee experience is great, and then engaged employees are more likely to deliver great customer service. So they all are really tied together.
I would, so I agree with everything that other folks said. I tend to look at employee experience as, something that we tend to focus on the what instead of the how. And I always look at, how we recruit people, and how we treat people during the recruitment process. Do we get back to them the way we said we would get back to them when we said we would get back to them? Are the things that we sold them before they said yes, what they're experiencing and seeing in the onboarding process, and sort of later in the more advanced stages of the employee life cycle. So when I think about it from a foundation element and how you build the foundation, other than really wanting to be committed and intentional about delivering an employee experience, particularly for people from historically excluded backgrounds, I think about the how, which I think is very much what informs people's experience. And then I think about whether the job and the experience we sold people in the recruitment and the earlier stages of our relationship, right, which is really our first contract, whether the commitments we made in that process are alive and well in my experiences.
Carol.
Well, I agree with everything that the panel has brought forth, and I would only add that and reinforce that I think all of those experiences are interconnected, right? And I think that's one thing that people are learning more and more about employee experiences is you can't just put it in a box and say, this is our customer experience, and not take into account the multitude of influences that come from the candidate experience, the employee experience, the brand experience. And I think even more as people start to think about, people who may boomerang from an organization, they may leave the organization and offboard, but at some point they may want to come back, or they may want to be a customer. So I think it's really important that, again, you don't isolate any of these factors, but you think about them more holistically and how they feed into each other.
Now, I do want to make sure that we have the biggest chunk of our time dedicated to talking about what employee experience is and what it looks like, what it feels like, what are the building blocks of it. But I also want to be mindful very early on into our conversation that we carve out the things that employee experience is not. And I will just ask you to be mindful of one small thing. I know that employee experience and employee engagement is a particularly effervescent slice of this conversation, and we will address it separately. So let's first look at what employee experience is not, and what have you seen most often associated with employee experience, and that needs a little bit more navigating within workplaces. And I will do my diagonal signature move, and I will ask Mary to lead us into this.
Sure. So when I think about this, about what it's not, it's just not employee engagement alone. It's not the process of HR alone. Or sometimes, people define it as employee satisfaction surveys. It's just not that. I think we have to look at it holistically, or, sometimes you see organizations do these one-time events or programs to try to fill a void of something that was going on. It really is something that's intentional, that we have to be strategic about, and not these one-offs. And it's also, just not the only positive things about the company. Sometimes there are some uncomfortable conversations that we have to have, or what I like to call brave conversations we have to have. There's really great things about positive things at a company, but it's just not that. And it's got to be something that isn't just driven by management or by leadership. It really has to permeate across the company.
Thank you. Colin, I saw you unmuted there for a few seconds.
I got a little activated when Mary talked about the fact that it's not just HR's responsibility. And that's the first place I went. And it's early for me to start my activism, but it is not just HR's responsibility to make sure that the people who come through our doors, that when they leave, they say, as a result of my time here, I'm a better person, I'm a better professional. That is something at all levels of the organization, including, senior leaders. That's something that we're all supposed to, be invested in. And the other thing that came to mind, as I sometimes say, is that, employees know the difference between butter and margarine, right? And so employee experience is butter, it is not margarine. And if we try to sell it to be different than it is, then we're going to continue to have people disappointed about their experience, and also looking at HR as the place from which that experience delves. So not just HR's responsibility, and it's not margarine.
I see we're starting rehearsing for mic drops. That's always a good sign so early in the conversation. Krista, would you like to jump in? Oh, Carol, I see Carol.
I think, to be a little cheeky here, I think it really, what comes to mind when you ask that question, Manola, was it's not a ping pong table. It's not free lunches. It's not those nice to haves. It's really about how people are, at its foundation, about how people are treated, and how all of those moments connect together. So when I think, I think a lot of times people have the misnomer of it's these series of parties or events or celebrations. And I want to be very clear that from my perspective, those can be additive, but they're not what employee experience is all about.
I would echo what's already been said. So it's not just benefits and perks. It's not just HR's responsibility. And one thing I would add is sometimes it seems like there's this sense that technology can fix a lot of challenges with employee experience, and it can certainly enhance some parts of it. For example, communication, workflow, efficiency for remote and hybrid work. Technology can definitely enhance those. But I think what some workplaces are sort of losing these days are the strong human elements. So we still need authentic leadership. We still need a supportive culture. We still need interpersonal relationships, finding ways for employees to connect with each other and to leaders and to the organization. And technology can't replace everything.
Everything that everyone said. That is so true. I mean, think of an excellent employee onboarding experience, right? If I, as a new joiner, don't know what to do during my day, I don't know who to meet, you can give me all the pizza in the world and I'm not going to be happy about joining the organization, right? You can give me a great bonus and paycheck, but if I don't trust my manager, if I don't have a meaningful role, I think employee experience is not just about, hey, this is what we think employees want, right? They just want to work remotely every day of the week. That's not true. I think it's about reaching out and asking people what they want, listening to what they want. And with the diversity in the workforce, it's so important that we design different employee experiences for different people. It is I was reading this article the other day where it said the frontline employees are the most dissatisfied at the moment because they don't feel that they trust their leadership. They don't feel like they have opportunity to grow and share what they feel. And I think taking into consideration, what is it that would make a good experience for them? That needs to be the driver for employee experience, and not just a, come on, HR, throw a party because let's just everyone, invite them to an offsite, have some fun, give some alcohol. That's not what people want. I think we're not kids. We cannot be distracted by some of these toys. And we need to really focus on providing an experience that employees value.
Mary, do you want to add something?
Yes,
Please.
I was going to add something just to her point. I love what you said about the free lunches or the food trucks or, whatever, right? I think so often right now we're really at this interesting intersection. Since COVID, I feel like we're applying pre-COVID strategies or benefits or fun or whatever, and thinking it's going to work in today's work environment. And I think what we learn is that there's a lot of flexibility that comes with remote or hybrid work, right? But also there is this delicate balance of work-life integration that we have learned. And what might have been very shiny and wonderful that worked before, those things aren't working right now. We really do have a different workforce. We have different expectations. And to your point, you could have free pizza every Wednesday. That isn't going to make me want to come into the office more, right? And so I think we have to have a more authentic conversation about what does it look like here at said company, right? Because every company is different. What is the buy-in from leadership? And what are we willing to invest, whether some of it's technology and, still having that human-centric approach to it. And when we're not aligned on those conversations, we really are going to have a tough workforce that isn't going to feel engaged. They're not going to feel connected, or they might even start looking elsewhere, right? Because how they feel, to your point, how they feel on Sunday night about work on Monday morning has to do with all of these different intricate points that we're talking about. But we've got to change the conversation. I feel like we're still kind of copy pasting from pre-COVID, and we've really got to just flip it over on a whole new dynamic than what we've done before. And you know what? Some ideas are going to work and some aren't going to work, but we can't still be doing the same thing thinking we're going to get different results with our employees.
I just want to say that I actually, and it could be because I have a food obsession, but I don't think that there's anything wrong with the pizza parties. I think that there's something wrong with the pizza parties if they're isolated things that are not connected to a broader strategy on how people are engaging and integrating, which is what I think Carol and Mary are saying. I agree with that. And the other thing is that, I think we have the other problem that we have is that people don't feel seen, right? So then the question becomes like, how can you lead me if you don't see me? And the complexity of doing employee experience well is not because it's hard work. It's because it requires a lot of time and consistency, and because all of the things that you do to contribute to a positive employee experience, one small thing can disrupt the whole thing, which is why leadership and HR should be in leadership, by the way. If your organizations don't have HR and leadership, send them this tape. Tell them I said that they're doing it wrong. But that's why we need to have leadership and HR integrated, so that so on this journey, we're actually heading in the right direction. Mm. I just wanted to defend pizza just for a second.
We are all defending pizza on this conversation. What are the key components of an employee experience? And I heard each of you mentioning either some elements or some milestones. So one additional question there is there a first among equals when we think about the components of an employee experience? And Carol, I would ask you to go first on this one.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm going to ask the fellow panelists to please jump in, because there's so much to that question that I think it can be all encompassing part of the employee experience. For me, I look at it probably more linearly in the employee life cycle. And I think your first opportunity to really start to show your brand, show the experiences that are important for your organization is that candidate experience. So, your first touch points with an organization as a potential employer are going to be formative in terms of your opinion about whether or not you want to work with that organization. So it's not just, did I get a response to my application, but it's how, to Colin's point, how was that response? Did I get an automated message? Did I get a phone call? And does that meet with my expectations of how I want to be interacted with throughout this process? How did the interviews go? Did I have enough time to ask the questions that are important to me about understanding this potential employer? Or, did they pepper me with questions for an hour and then hang up? So I think for me, it really starts with that candidate experience and then goes through onboarding and through the day-to-day interactions with your managers, all the way through offboarding. We've talked about that. And I mentioned earlier, the opportunity for someone to be a boomerang. And if you leave an organization, it's much more prevalent to have the opportunity to come back at a different point in your career. And how you're treated at every point and at every intersection along that continuum dictates whether or not you would want to come back at some point. So offboarding, although it seems like an ending, can also be a part of a new beginning at some point.
I see a lot of supporting nodding on the screen. Anuja, please.
Very tricky question, Manola, because all 7 of those stages are so critical, especially like Carol said, two-way communication, whether it is with people who are not yet employees of the organization or were alumni or employees. The answer that I'm going to choose is the one that makes most employees quit their organization. And those are the managers that people have. It's a very, very tricky situation for managers because they have to listen to the leaders who are making the business decisions about layoffs, about, dealing with inflation, recession. But at the same time, they're also the front face for their teams and employees. They're the ones that have the most control and influence on the employees' day-to-day experience with the organization, whether it is meeting with them for one-on-one feedback, enabling team conversations on shared goals, offering them any kind of support, right? Whether it's about their well-being, dealing with stress and burnout, making their roles more engaging and meaningful, giving them autonomy over making decisions. And sometimes it's just about active listening skills, just meeting with employees. Oh, yeah, he agrees with me, right? It's about really making sure that your employees feel seen and heard. And while everyone needs to do that, I think the onus particularly is for the manager to make sure that they're there to deal with the employees, whether they're remote, whether they're in a managerial role, whether they're new hires, just to be there and support them through their experience.
We have instant feedback. Apologies for this, Mary.
I was going to say another piece that is entering this piece is that aspect of well-being and mental health. I think it's really elevated to a level that we haven't quite seen before, and leaders are having a difficult time with kind of flexing that what I call new muscle, right? I think it's one that does help to your point, to some of the panel here that talked about helping them feel heard. There are some aspects of that, and then I can't help but think about the complexity that leaders are having around creating psychological safety, and how that really permeates throughout the employee experience. And then, so often, depending on generational differences, I think there's an aspect of, we've got to look at individualized solutions. What's going to work for one person on a team doesn't work for another person on a team. And weaving all of that together, it's a difficult time to be a leader. There's so many different things. We're learning how to manage remotely, in a remote environment. It's increasing diversity, if they're doing it right. So you're having more diverse teams. And so there's a lot of different, what I like to say, new tools that we've got to be sure that we have in our toolbox here, or to Colin saying, we've got more stuff on the menu here, right? And so we've got to figure out what we're going to do with that. But it takes a lot of really authentic, intentional planning and thought as a leader to ensure that employee engagement experience is where it needs to be.
Krista, or Colin and Krista. Colin,
No, Krista, please.
So I think it's all of these things. It's work environment, it's the managers, it's well-being, mental health. We haven't really touched on career development and growth opportunities yet, or learning. Those are definitely really three key areas those can really affect the employee experience. I think the other thing that's underlying a lot of what we're talking about is alignment or misalignment with expectations, because expectations for each employee can be so different. Not to say that organizations can and should meet every single expectation, but how well are we doing in meeting the explicit expectations and also the implicit expectations? I think Carol talked about this in terms of interviewing. Colin mentioned this a little bit in the intro. There's a book titled Employee Experience by Matthew Ride. His last name is Wride. And so he writes about 3 different types of contracts within employee experience. So brand contracts, transactional contracts, and psychological contracts. And just wanted to put that Post-it note on the board as well.
I'm sort of where you are, Krista. I was thinking about, and everyone, I was thinking about.
Colin, you're muted.
Colin, you're muted. Colin, you're on mute.
Oh, I've been working virtually for 3 years. I still don't know how to unmute myself. But I was not too far away from where you were, Krista. I was thinking about employee relations. I think I saw someone said they had an interview on Friday, and they were interested in the intersection of employee relations and the employee experience. And I was thinking about it not just from the vantage point of safety and safeguarding folks at work so they're not traumatized and bullied and sexually harassed and disrespected and devalued. But I was also thinking about employee relations and the employee experience as it pertains to really being consistent about what we do with people who inform bad culture and who make the workplace less safe. And the extent in which we're consistent about, when we stop educating and when we start disciplining, and we're consistent about what punishment looks like. And that's consistent from the folks at the top to those who are at lower levels in the organization. So I think a lot of people exit because of an employee relations issue, whether they're the subject of an investigation, whether they're complaining, they don't feel safe anymore, they don't feel like their issue was looked into. So I think this is a space we don't spend a lot of time talking about, but there are ways for us to strengthen how we're exiting people. The way we're treating people who are exited, that's just as important to the people who still remain. And I think that we fail in that space sometimes.
I do see that we are a couple of minutes already into the second half of our conversation, which is such a frustrating thing to say. I feel like we could go on for at least 1 full hour from now. But I want to bring into the conversation something that I've been seeing over and over again. Oftentimes when I find myself in employee experience conversations with people within HR, it almost feels like we're talking about something that's outside of us, outside of HR, that applies to the rest of the organization. So the question that I would like to bring into this panel is, what is the HR flavor of the employee experience? And how can we help our HR colleagues to really feel part of this as it applies to them as well, not just to the rest of the organization? And Krista, I saw you smiling and nodding. So can you please lead us into this?
Sure. I was just jotting down your question because I feel like there were so many important components of it. I think as we talked briefly about a few minutes ago, it's not just HR. I think it's important that everyone across the organization understands that every single employee influences the employee experience for someone else. I feel like that's my mic drop moment, and I should just mute myself there. But it's the leaders, it's the high level leaders, it's a colleagues, it's peers. I think that toughest question is not, it's easier to get buy-in from HR colleagues. I think the harder buy-in is from everyone across the organization, because in a lot of organizations, especially with changes from the HR title to things like people and culture or culture and workplace, I think a lot of employees could feel like this is HR's responsibility. And so I think that's the tougher buy-in to get across the organization.
Thank you. And Krista, I don't know if it was just me, but your audio was a little bit hiccupy for this past answer. And I see that probably it's an inclusive issue with the internet. The question was, what is the HR flavor of the employee experience? Because oftentimes when I sit in conversations with colleagues from HR about employee experience, they speak as if it's something that doesn't necessarily apply to them directly. That was the question, in case I also came across hiccupy. Carol, I see you unmuted.
Yeah, I want to flash back to something Krista mentioned earlier, and I think sometimes HR can get caught up in being in support of the organization, that they do feel like they're somewhat separate and outside of that. And I think sometimes Krista mentioned it earlier, you can see it as being very compartmentalized. And I've seen some HR teams rely on things like technology to enhance the employee experience. And while, again, that's a component of it, they can often, see themselves outside of that, or look at solutions that are just a part of the solution instead of really thinking about that holistically. And I also think it's about how HR positions themselves within the organization, right? Colin mentioned it as well, that, HR needs to be a part of that leadership team, and they need to be a part of that conversation. And, I think when you default to being in service for the organization, sometimes it's really easy to see yourself outside of that experience. And that's a really, really lonely place to be.
Yeah. Anuja.
I share Colin's love for pizza and any food for that matter. But I will say this on behalf of everyone who's on this panel and in the audience today. I think HR people tend to put themselves last. So whether it's going, for any of the benefits that are available, I don't know how many HR folks go and use the employee assistance programs that are available. It's really about listening to employees and offering them the best solutions that are possible. And most of these do not fall within the realm of the HR domain, right? We cannot control the decisions that business makes. We can try to advise and consult, but finally, whatever the leadership decides is what we need to agree with, even if we don't completely agree with it. I think what HR can do to make their lives a little easier is to, one, accept that you don't control everything. There are some things that will go wrong, even with the best of intent. And two, offering recommendations to everyone across the board, whether it is the managers, whether it is the leadership, the IT team, about so many of the access and application issues, because these are the touch points that either frustrate the employee or delight the employee. So not just planning programs and initiatives that are like Band-Aids, but actually looking at what are a couple of top things that different people, different stakeholders and teams need to do, And then taking advantage of them yourselves as HR employees, because you're also employees of the organization, and thinking about what will make your experience in the organization better.
When I think about this, I think one of the other things is we have to be really intentional within HR of how we take care of ourselves, to everybody's point. It's so easy to, HR to put themselves last, or they're so busy taking care of the business that they're not realizing the employee experience of their own HR people. And so, it always feels like everyone's just hitting the ground running, and you're going, and this team needs this, and this team needs that. But if we don't take care of the HR team, and we're really intentional about that core, that nucleus of this, right, it's going to go off the rails. And so I think I would challenge the leadership of HR to really think about, how do you ensure that you're taking care of your own people? What is their employee experience like? Because burnout is happening at a different rate right now than what we've seen before. We're losing people tremendously across all organizations, but within HR, it's becoming more and more complex. It's more stressful in a way that we haven't quite seen. And so you've got to be really intentional. You've got to embed it, and you've got to make the time to do all of those things. And I think about it in the sense of training. Everyone says, well, I don't have time for training. I don't have time for learning. Well, you've got to prioritize it. We make time for the things that are important to us, right? And so HR's got to make that priority for themselves so that they are better served to help the rest of the organization.
Colin, you're on mute again.
I know, I was just testing you this time. I really hope people listen to those last couple of answers, because in all seriousness, you're listening to a person who burned out. And I wake up every day sort of in service to HR and DEI leaders, really trying to express the importance of understanding that we are not built to do everything. And so when I think about HR's flavor, I'm reminded of the fact that what we are up against is the fact that one, the organization actually belongs to everyone these days, not just people who make decisions. And so HR's flavor has to be what we just heard in the previous answer from Anisha, a balance between what's right for the business and what's right for the people who are in the business. And the mix that I have that has worked for me is giving the organization a little bit of what it wants, a little bit of what it needs, and a healthy mix of what they don't know that they need, but they need, or in other words, what the things that they don't want, but that they actually need, and finding ways to understand your capacity and try to please all three of those things, I think has been the recipe for success for me, at least in some of the places that I've been. And then the last thing is, if you are in an organization and you don't have a seat at the table, you don't feel like you have any power or influence, and there isn't a partnership or shared accountability on what we do with staff sentiment, then you are not working in the right place. And there are lots of very difficult decisions that are connected to that. But I wake up every morning after I exercise, and I'm on LinkedIn, and I see jobs. So they're out there. So do not tie yourself to a place that is forcing you to do HR in a way that's not responsive to your values or what makes sense for you. And I'll stop there.
I would really love to build on this wonderful message of we can do anything, but we can't do everything. And for everybody in the audience who feels inspired to go back and really make a difference around themselves within their workplaces, where would you tell them to start? How can they start sense make of where their energy and their focus would be most meaningful. And a small spin to the question, there are extra points available if you can also touch how can people who are an HR function of one make the most of their limited resources and time and human capacity at the end of the day. And I will leave this question there, and please build build as inspiration strikes, and just pass the e-mic around. Where could we start with all this inspiration? Mary.
Well, this is not an easy question, first of all. But I think, one of the things you have to do is really just look at what the priorities are. We've got to really look at those priorities and then strategize around that, and where are the high impact areas that align with the organization's strategic goals. I would start there first. And then I would outsource where possible, and it may not always be possible. I would leverage technology to kind of automate some things that, might be time consuming, but also you've got to build strong relationships within the organization. It's really fascinating to me when, I've got to have those conversations with leaders, when I'm able to be really transparent and authentic and say, look, this is where we are. This is where we need to get. Here's the challenges. And we have this really transparent discussion about what is at stake for us, what could happen if we do nothing else, right? And I think you have to have those conversations. And, yes, sometimes you got to have them with people you don't know well. But I think when you can really be authentic and have that transparency, you can really move the needle there. And then I think the other piece is you've got to develop some clear policies and procedures. People need to know what to do, how to do it, when to do it, where to go. And then where can we continue to focus on employee development, whether that's career pathing, any kind of learning training program to that degree. Those are those things that we've got to do. And then you've got to be able to tell that story. So telling that story with data and metrics, telling that story through the impact HR is having, because we know what we're doing. We know how great some things are, but the employees don't know that. So how do we tell that story through really great marketing and employee communications, but also leveraging data and metrics where possible to also tell that story?
I'm going to say partnership. You don't have to do everything alone, right? And with most companies being HR departments of one, you need to leverage other people, their skills and expertise. Over the course of my career, I've done most successfully is partner with business leaders and other stakeholders to either co-create programs or initiatives that will finally be driven by them with the support of the HR team. And this is more effective because they're the ones that engage more often with their employees directly. Also, I'm going to throw in artificial intelligence there. Artificial intelligence does not have to do everything, but it can definitely help you with some of the more monotonous tasks that rob you of your time and your effort. So what are the things that can be automated, that can be maybe done online, but finally employees want to engage and interact with real humans. They don't want to be managed by AI. They want to be managed by people. They want to engage with humans. So how can we create those meaningful moments of human interaction and socialization, use AI for some of the more redundant tasks, and then partner with business leaders and stakeholders to create the right kind of programs that will finally be driven by the leadership.
Colin, I see you unmuted this time.
I knew you were going to say that. It's a good one. I'm just going to answer. So Anuja is right. So the guidance for the small but mighty HR team of one or two is to develop working groups. You're not the only one who cares about culture. So find, do some outreach, get some stakeholder groups and build your own set of internal evangelists who can go out, get feedback, spread the good word, and do some of the heavy lifting to help and repeat and cycle, right? So if it's not culture, if it's reimagining performance management, get a new working group together, get some new people, bring some new voices to the table. It also gives people an understanding just how difficult our job is, because people don't really understand. And then the more overarching point to your question, Manola, I think is that people in the absence of clarity make up their own things, and they can be ridiculous. They don't have to be true, and people will believe it. And so we didn't talk about it today, but internal comms is free. But the value and impact it derives in bringing people along on the journey, and letting people know that even though everything isn't resolved, that we're working towards things, is a powerful mechanism to remind employees that we care about them.
Well, Carol.
Yeah, I agree with the insightful comments that the panel's had so far, and really enjoyed this. I think that one of the things that I want to keep coming back to is that stakeholder engagement, like we heard from Anuja and Colin. I think that gathering those supporters around you and helping them be successful in supporting some of the initiatives that are going to support the employee experience is critical and key. We've also talked a little bit about the fact that it's not just HR's job to create employee experiences, right? And I think that level of clarity and setting those expectations is definitely a foundational first step, especially for those HR departments of one. Making sure that you link arms with everyone and that everyone understands that that's a critical part of their role, and that they all play a piece in the employee experience. And I think that's the kind of foundation that you want to create in the organization, because your other opportunities will springboard from there. But without that, it really is, it could become that whack-a-mole game that you're trying to put out an initiative and then move to the next one and move to the next one. And to Colin's point earlier, that can create a lot of burnout if you don't have that foundational support and have created the expectation that it's a part of what everybody needs to bring to the work environment.
Well, Krista, I don't envy you in the hot seat of going last for this round.
I agree with everything that has been said. I'm not sure that I could say something brilliant and new. So just wrapping all of that together, I think what Carol was just saying about making employee experience a foundation. So how can we weave that into onboarding, helping employees understand you are part of developing the employee experience across the organization? I think that's really important. And then getting buy-in from different stakeholders, building partnerships. Not much more I can add to that.
Well, we are in the last 7 minutes of our conversation, and I was thinking what to ask, but then I hold back on wording a question, and I would like to do something a little bit different. Your energy around the topic is really coming off the screen, and it's palpable, and each of you have your own lens to the topic. So the last minutes will be a free topic, free flow space of conversation. If there is any topic that we already covered that you want to add something to, or you want to just bring in a final thought or a final reflection into our conversation to leave our audience with. So let's put these last minutes to good use. And where does your energy take you now within this topic? What is the message that you want to leave with our audience as we prepare to wrap up. And I will give you a few seconds to think about it, just enough to thank everybody for staying with us over the past 1 hour. And if you enjoy this and you want to re-listen or rewatch, or you want to recommend this conversation to your colleagues, you can either do it through the same link from LinkedIn. In a few minutes after the live is wrapped up, you will get the recording, or from hackinghrlab.io. And the floor is yours. The free topic round of answers. Who wants to lead us into this? Krista.
Well, Colin, you're unmuted. Did you want to share?
No, please
Nope.
go. Please.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, the one thing that we haven't really highlighted is the role of purpose and meaning at work. And so we know from a lot of research that employees who find the work meaningful are more engaged, more motivated, more satisfied. Sense of purpose can really increase and enhance the employee experience. So just a question to put out there: how can we communicate, even before onboarding someone, how their individual role will contribute to the organization's mission and how they can find a sense of purpose in that? I think that's a really important piece of employee experience that is maybe not talked about as much as others.
Thank you, Krista. Great point. Anuja.
I think if we take a step back and really look at how things have changed over the past decade or two, where employers were initially saying, hey, we are customer obsessed, the customer is king, right? Whatever they say, we'll just do. And now it's more an employee-focused organization that everybody's looking for and wanting to join. So I think there's been a transition. And just like companies are evaluating performance of employees are also looking at their organizations and saying, hey, this is what I thought when I joined, and either the organization aligns to those expectations or does not, right? People, leaders, businesses are calling employees back to work. And this is probably the first time that employees are meeting their colleagues, their managers, their leaders, seeing if what they thought about that organization is true or not. How can we make sure as HR partners, as employees of the organization, to make sure that we are offering that level of support, psychological safety, trust, career development opportunities, and growth opportunities? And not everything can be possible, right? There will be definite restrictions and restraints for the organization, for the employees themselves. But can we offer flexibility to employees where they need it? Some people want to come to office every day. Can we enable that for them? Others may have challenges, but want meaningful social interactions when they come into the office a couple of days a week. And what is really required and possible versus what needs to be mandated. I think leaders need to sit back and think about, why am I asking employees to do this? And is it what they want? Because earlier, employees used to stay with organizations at least for 3 to 5 years. It's drastically going down to just a few months, where employees don't hesitate in saying, this organization does not fit my needs, I'm moving on. So if you want to hire the best talent, retain the best talent, then you need to make those efforts. You just can't write it off as fluff and say, hey, I'm not going to worry about employee experience anymore, because that truly means a lot.
Thank you, Anuja. Carol.
I would add on to that as well. I think you can have a lot of assumptions feed into those process. So if you take the time to listen and help people connect the dots, I think that can go a long way with helping establish your culture and really creating the right experience that you want to. And I would also say that there are probably organizations out there that are very focused on, we want everybody back in the office. We want them in 5 days a week, and we want them during these core business hours. And I think as long as you're transparent and authentic about that message and why it's important, you're going to have people self-select into that type of environment. So again, it's not about making assumptions that everybody needs, a fully remote schedule. It's marrying that with the authentic experiences that you're creating within the work environment, and being really transparent about, again, what it is, what we stand for, and also what it's not.
Thank you. Mary.
I think one of the other things we've got to think about is, we have to do what we said we were going to do when we hired these people. it shouldn't just be a one-off. We have to be consistent. And I think too, we have to take an internal look within our culture and our employee experience. It isn't rainbows and unicorns for everybody. And we've got to be honest about some of the things that we have done around creating that type of environment. And while it's not one of the things we're all running to jump and talk about, but it's a very important piece, to that. And then I would say, lastly, we've got to really start embracing that change is going to be constant within the next decade. AI is here. It's coming. It's already here for some folks. And if you're not going to be a disruptor in this space, your company will be disrupted with AI if you're not preparing for that change and how we can really optimize the employee experience when it comes to AI and keeping a human-centric approach to it.
Thank you so much, Mary. Colin.
Yeah, not having a seat at the table is not an excuse. And hope is not a strategy. So somewhere in between doing nothing and doing something is an opportunity for us to meet the moment, and we can really start small. But I think the idea is to let employees know that we care about these things and demonstrate ways that we're going to be different, and framing that change not as a referendum on HR or leadership, but in acknowledging that we're in a really difficult moment, and difficult moments require something other than our tired, dusty strategies. So I think the opportunity here is to be bold and to try. And if you're alone and isolated, find other people who have shared perspectives and a desire to be somewhere different and get something done.
Thank you so very much, Krista, Colin, Mary, Anuja, and Carol. It was a joy and a privilege hosting you today. And what a way to kickstart the June series. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you, everybody in the audience, for taking the time and the curiosity to be here. And I hope that we will get the chance to welcome as many of you throughout our June conversations as possible. Thank you, Jessa, as always. And take care and create amazing people experiences all around you. Thank you, everyone, and see you soon.